Press conference is to provide some updates and overviews in some of the recent homicides from this past week. We do have, we're going to go through homicides 58 through 62, so we do have the detectives over those cases right now. How the press conference is going to go, we're going to have Lieutenant Askew here, who's over the aggravated assault and homicide unit, give some brief remarks, and then we'll go through each individual homicide. So we'll go through homicide 58, and we'll allow 3 questions per homicide. So we'll do homicide 58, we'll allow 3 questions. Homicide 59, allow 3 questions. If you have any general questions, we'll save those for the end, and Lieutenant Askew can come and ask some questions at the end. Does that all make sense? Yeah. Okay, so we'll kind of go down the line here. I'll do the same spell of everyone here. So first up here, we have Lieutenant Sheldon Askew. That's S-H-E-L-D-O-N. Last name Askew, A-S-K-E-W. Again, he's the lieutenant over the homicide and aggravated assault units. Next to him, this is Detective Richard Spittler, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, S-P-I-T-L-E-R. He's the lead detective over homicide number 58. Next to him, this is Danny Hernandez, D-A-N-N-Y-H-E-R-N-A-N-D-E-Z. He's going to be the secondary detective over homicide 59. Standing next to him is Will Marshall, W-I-L-L-M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L. He is the lead detective over homicide number 60. Next to him is Jason Jones, J-A-S-O-N-J-O-N-E-S, and he's the lead detective over homicide 61. And standing next to him is going to be Michael Decker, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, last name Decker, D-E-C-K-E-R, and he is the lead detective over homicide 62. Also in regards to homicide 62, we did want to read a statement. This is going to be from Commander Lee Davis. I'll read it in behalf of him. Homicide 62 did involve a person experiencing homelessness. So again, this statement is in behalf of Commander Lee Davis, L-E-E-D-A-V-I-S. And I'll just read the statement for you now. It says, "My condolences and prayers to all involved and impacted. Loss of life is always tragic. This is particularly tragic because of the recklessness of human behavior. The Austin Police Department is working diligently with all the stakeholders including Caritas, the site management team, security, the Homeless Strategy Office, and of course, our council member, Jose Vela. Our goal is to find meaningful and pragmatic ways to ensure that there is no misalignment of intent of the location and impact to the community. This location houses some of our most vulnerable community members, and for some, this is a last stop for hope. That does not mean their hope should come at the cost of everyone else's safety and well-being. Finding that intersection of coexistence where everyone has a seat at the table and benefits from that seat is where we seek to be." And with that, we'll turn it over to some general questions from Lieutenant Askew, or general statements from Lieutenant Askew. Once we get to questions for the detectives, if you could raise your hand, please, and then we'll call on you for those. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming today. My name is Sheldon Askew, and like Claire said, I'm the lieutenant over the homicide and aggravated assault units. I want to start by recognizing the tragic events that have brought us here today. Anytime that anyone loses their life in the city of Austin, it not only affects the family members, the loved ones, and the friends of those who have passed, but the community at large. And the police department wants to recognize that and offer its condolences to all those that were affected. Today we're going to give a briefing on multiple homicide cases that have happened over the past 2 weeks. We are going to be briefing those cases and offering an opportunity for you all to ask questions. Please keep in mind these are active, ongoing investigations. There are going to be things we might not be able to answer, but it's simply to preserve the integrity of the investigation if that's the case. Before we get started, what I want to do is recognize not only the homicide unit, but I also want to recognize the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force, the risk unit within the police department, the intelligence unit in the police department, and the civilian staff, which includes the victim services units and others who play an integral role in the investigation of these cases and the justice that we seek for the victims involved. And with that, I'll turn it over to Detective Spittler.
On Thursday, November 7th, 2024, approximately 4:34 p.m., Austin Police Department officers responded to the 2600 block of Rosewood Avenue for reports of a shooting. When officers arrived on scene, they found one victim, later identified as Matthew Escalante, with a gunshot wound. Mr. Escalante was transported to a local hospital where life-saving measures were performed. Aggravated assault detectives and crime scene specialists responded to process the scene and interview witnesses. The investigation showed that Mr. Escalante had arrived to meet someone and was then shot and killed by a suspect, who then fled the area with additional suspects. The following day, on November 8th, 2024, at 3:20 p.m., Mr. Escalante was pronounced deceased at the hospital. This case was then transferred to the Homicide Unit and is actively being investigated as Austin's 58th homicide of 2024. If there's anyone with any information, we are asking that you contact the Austin Police Department at 512-974-TIPS, TIPS. You may submit your tip anonymously through Capital Area Crime Stoppers program by visiting either austincrimestoppers.org or by calling 512-472-8477. A reward of up to $1,000 may be available for any information that leads to an arrest in this investigation. Is there any questions?
Do you know what the suspect and victim were meeting up for?
At this time, I'm still trying to determine that. Like I said, this is still an active investigation, so we're trying to look at everything possible.
Anything else for Detective Spittler?
I guess I'll ask if that's all right. The victim, obviously they died the next day. Were they at all responsive in that day to help with the investigation, or do they have family or friends that have helped with the investigation?
No, so Mr. Escalante was not responsive during that time.
Gotcha. But friends and family, have they been cooperative at all, or have you been able to find them?
Yes, so I have been able to speak with friends, have been able to speak with family. They have been cooperating throughout the investigation and helping out in any way that they possibly can.
And have you found any of those additional suspects that fled with the primary suspect?
Not yet. So I'm still trying to work on any leads that are received by the Homicide Unit, which is why, again, ask the public to please, if you know anything, then call it in, and that way we can follow up on any investigative leads that may possibly lead to an arrest.
Thank you, Detective Spittler. Do Homicide 59, this is Detective Hernandez.
Hello, I'm Detective Hernandez with the Austin Police Department Homicide Unit. On Sunday, November 10th, at approximately 6:32 p.m., APD officers responded to the 1900 block of East William Cannon for a call of shoot, stab, hot shot. Multiple callers reported that a male was lying on the ground bleeding and had possibly been stabbed, cut, or possibly hit by a car. The victim could be heard in the background during the 911 calls answering questions. Officers arrived a short time later and found a male on the ground with a defect to his chest and bleeding. The male was identified as Elijah Martinez and was transported to a local hospital and was later pronounced deceased at 8:12 p.m. Aggravated assault and homicide detectives, along with crime scene specialists, responded to the scene. They processed the scene and interviewed witnesses available at that time. It was unclear if the victim had fallen on something or was attacked on or near the sidewalk area. A video canvas of the neighborhood led us to believe that the victim had been stabbed in a homeless encampment behind the AutoZone store nearby, and multiple individuals fled the area after the stabbing. We are currently working multiple leads in this case, but no suspects have been identified. And again, this is being investigated as Austin's 59th homicide of this year. Any questions?
Do you know if the suspects were also living in that homeless encampment?
It's undetermined at this time, but it's a possibility.
And do you know what led up to this? Was it an altercation?
We're still investigating the exact cause as well.
Anything else for Detective Hernandez?
Thank you.
We'll turn over to Detective Marshall. This is Homicide 60.
Good afternoon. On Wednesday, November 13th, approximately 4:15 in the afternoon, the 7800 block of South 1st Street, this is near 1st Street and Dittmer, near the intersection, Austin 911 received multiple calls of a man who had been stabbed. Police were able to arrive in less than 5 minutes and detain a suspect on scene. This was thanks to the witnesses who were able to direct the first responding officers. At that time, they detained, Luis Pedro Mariquin, Mr. Merriquin was subsequently transferred up here. We were able to speak with Mr. Merriquin. He did admit to stabbing Marco Antonio Nunez Mayan. We believe this is a personal disagreement between the two men. They knew each other from the local community down in South Austin, and he's currently in Travis County Jail. Because this was at First Street and South Ditmer, this was 4:15 in the afternoon, there are several witnesses who did come forward, but I know there were likely several more, so I am asking if anybody saw anything prior to, during, or immediately after this. We'd ask that they come forward. Any questions from there? Yeah.
Did they say what the disagreement was? What led up to this?
Just a personal disagreement. He didn't go into detail.
Okay.
Any other questions for Detective Marshall? Thank you. We'll go to Detective Jones for Homicide 61.
Good morning. On November 15th at approximately 12:42 a.m., the Austin Police Department was called to the 8400 block of Goldfinch Court about multiple calls regarding several gunshots being heard in the area and about a person being shot. Officers arrived and located a victim with obvious gunshot wounds. The victim was identified as Travis Terrell Holland, a black male born on January 24th, 1992. Travis's injuries were of such a significant nature that officers and responding emergency medical personnel immediately recognized that his injuries were not compatible with life. Travis was pronounced deceased at 1:01 a.m. One of the 911 callers reported that his brother-in-law, identified as William Jameson Bruce, a 31-year-of-age black male, was responsible for the shooting. William Bruce was detained near the scene by responding officers. Detectives interviewed a female victim who was walking with Travis Holland when he was shot. Detectives learned William Bruce also shot at the female victim. Fortunately, she was uninjured. William Bruce was transported to the homicide office. During an interview with a detective, Bruce admitted responsibility for the shooting. William Bruce has been arrested and has been charged with 1 count of murder and 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He is currently in the custody of the Travis County Sheriff's Office. Any questions?
Was this also a personal disagreement?
We're in the early stages of the investigation. That's still being investigated.
Anything else for Detective Jones?
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Detective Michael Decker, and I'm the lead investigator of homicide number 62. On Saturday, November 16th, APD officers in Austin 911 received a call about a shooting at 1934 Rutland Drive. Officers arrived on scene and found one female with an apparent gunshot wound to the chest, and she was later pronounced deceased at the scene. The victim was identified as Jessica Shaw, a white female born on March 14, 1978. Ms. Shaw is a person experiencing homelessness and was visiting a friend at the time of the murder. There was one person arrested in connection with the murder. He's a 36-year-old male named Noah Mata. Mata is a resident at the apartment and was arrested for a first-degree aggravated robbery and booked into Travis County Jail. The charge was based on information that we have at the time and we have now, and was through consultation with the Travis County District Attorney's Office that we determined the most appropriate charge was aggravated robbery. We determined that at the time of the murder, Mata was in an argument or in a disturbance with another person in his apartment. During that disturbance, a firearm was discharged and went through the wall, striking Ms. Shaw. There were other witnesses and persons of interest that we're still looking for. I would like to urge those witnesses and those people to come forward and give statements. And if anyone else knows anything about the murder or the people that were involved, to call 974-TIPS as well. Any questions?
I apologize for really slowing it down and making sure we're 100% on the same page, just because it's not a murder charge. You called it a murder, but it's an aggravated robbery. But the intended target, and I'm using that word loosely, was not Jessica Shaw, that the gun was fired and it went through the wall and just happened to kill her?
That is correct.
Okay, do you know what led up to that?
There's a couple different stories we're still investigating, but we'll just call it a disagreement or disturbance. So.
So was Mata trying to rob the other person in the apartment he was in?
That is a possibility, yes, ma'am.
Anything else for Detective Deckard?
Just, if I can ask this really quickly, and just to make sure we're 100% on the same page, just because we are talking about a person who's experiencing homelessness, being the victim, there wasn't any sort of, hate crime intentions. Just obviously there's a heightened tension when it comes to the unsheltered community. There's not any indication that had a role to play at all.
Yeah, as mentioned, like the gunshot went through the wall and struck her. She wasn't the intended target, so there was no targeting of her. So.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Detective Deckard. Do we have any general questions for Lieutenant Askew that you would like to ask?
Yes, sir.
I just keep asking questions. Obviously, we're dealing with several homicides over the last week. You correct me if I'm wrong. It doesn't seem that there's any indication, but that they're all connected. But do you know what has led to such a sharp increase? This is 10% of the homicides almost we've had the entire year. Just happened in the last week and a half.
Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly the reasons why we've seen this spike over a short period of time. We don't believe these are connected. I mean, as you've been briefed, the detectives are all running independent investigations, and again, we've yet to connect any of these. So I don't really have a solid answer for you, other than to say that, obviously it's concerning to us as a police department as well, that in fact we've seen such a spike.
And talking about that concern, can you kind of just address the strain? Obviously, it's well documented and well reported about the strains that are already on the Austin Police Department.
Sure.
There's not 6 homicides in a week and a half. How is that affecting the department?
I'm glad you asked that question. Look, the entire police department is a staffing crisis right now, and homicide is not exempt from that. We've seen a tremendous spike in the number of homicides since 2020 especially, and obviously this unit bears the responsibility to thoroughly investigate and hold those people accountable and responsible, the people who perpetrate those crimes, obviously. So with that being said, they're taxed. Oftentimes these folks are in the office before I get to the office. They're there after I leave the office. They're there on the weekends. They're there at all hours of the day and night. So it's taxing. There's no question about it. It's a burden upon the unit. But again, the dedication, the professionalism by these folks is truly what gets us to where we are, which is, again, solving these crimes and holding folks accountable. Yes, ma'am.
In general, when people are charged with crimes and the DA's office, dismisses them or declines prosecution, I mean, how frustrating is it for you guys as a department when, they're back out there possibly committing more crimes?
I don't know if frustration is the way we would describe it. Some of us live in this community. We all work in this community. We all have a connection to this community, and we all want to prevent crime. That's the reason we joined this police department to begin with. We don't always understand necessarily the reasons why things don't end in the way in which we would prefer them to, but oftentimes we don't have the luxury of knowing everything that's going on behind the scenes. So the reality is that we may not like the outcome, but at the end of the day, it's not going to deter the men and women of this police department, especially the homicide unit, of continuing to go out on a daily basis and investigate these crimes thoroughly and hold folks accountable and arrest them.
Anything else for Lieutenant Askew? Angela?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but compared to data from last year, has there been a similar spike at this time of year, or is it just kind of random?
So we're slightly ahead of where we were last year at this time, but it's not by much. Although we can say we're higher currently, that's not taking into account whether or not the spike was attributable to the recent increase of numbers, or if maybe there was a lull maybe in the early part of the year or something like that. I don't really know the answers to that question. I can simply tell you that, again, we're higher as of right now.
If I can turn it back over here.
Yes, sir.
Just going back to talking about the strain that's on officers, is there a concern that because of all the things that qualify as what's leading to this strain on officers, staffing shortages, low morale, things like that it's going to impact the investigation of these homicides? Is it slowing down the process, especially of finding some of these suspects in the cases where we don't even know who is responsible?
So I think it's hard to quantify whether or not it's slowing the investigation. The Austin Police Department's homicide unit has a very significant or high clearance rate, and we continue to maintain that high clearance rate. Again, it's hard to quantify whether or not it's slowing things down, but it definitely, again, staffing shortages have an impact. There's no doubt.
Anything else we can ask you?
Yes,
I mean, I
ma'am.
guess just as a public safety thing, it sounds like most of these are disagreements between two people who knew each other. I mean, what would be your message to the community, people who might be worried about hearing about this type of homicides?
I'm sorry. Can you rephrase the question for me?
Yeah, so for people in the community who might be worried about hearing about this spike of homicides, what
Sure.
would be your message to them?
Be kind to one another. Talk. Communicate. We can't get to a common place, respecting one another, caring for one another without communication. And I would encourage people to again, be kind.
Thank you, Lieutenant, and thank you all. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.